Hello everybody, this is the first of three quick videos that explains what happened in Europe during a period of time known as the Renaissance and Reformation. So whilst in Britain at the time, in England, the major ruling families of England were hacking each other to pieces in the War of the Roses. There was violence across England. There were huge developments taking place in the rest of Europe, and these changes cause historians to pinpoint this as a period of change in history. So this is where history stops being medieval history, so this stops being the Middle Ages, and we go into a period of history called the Renaissance. And many historians say that this is the start of modern history. So some people actually place the date of around 1500 as the start of what we know as historians as modern history. So we're going to focus in this video on events happening in modern day Italy. Now, Italy in 1500 wasn't a unified country like it is today. It was a patchwork of kingdoms, city-states, areas controlled by Rome, by the papacy, and as you can see, that it was a very disjointed place. But it was a place of incredible wealth. There were lots of people trading from across the world with its fantastic sea links, trading across the Mediterranean. So there were centres of huge wealth, and in the state of Florence that you can see in the middle of Italy here. There were families who made their wealth through banking, through looking after the money of all these amazing traders, and the famous Medici family being one of the most powerful ruling families in Florence. Now, this wealth meant that lots of people didn't have to work on the fields and with their hands to get them dirty for a living, because there was so much money around. So this meant that they could spend their time doing other things and thinking about other things. And a lot of these people with a lot of spare time on their hands began to think about the world around them and began to think about how Europe had been for thousands of years. So for thousands of years, the Catholic Church had been in control. The only book you ever really needed to read was the Bible, because all of the answers of the world was in there. Tradition was how things were. It was better to be traditional and things to be like they always had been, rather than think of new ideas and progress things. That was completely unheard of. So these people with time on their hands began to think, well, actually, is the world like that? Should we not begin to question these kind of accepted truths? Should we not begin to try and question what the world is like and see if we can find more truth in it and more explanation for it, rather than what's just in the Bible? Now, lots of these rich families, like the Medici family, thought that these people who were thinking like this were really exciting, and so they gave them money in order to pursue either their intellectual, scientific ideas or their artistic ideas. And this caused a great kind of seeking of explanations of the world. And they look back at before the Middle Ages, at the times of the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks, when there'd been a huge interest in how the world worked before Christianity spread. And so these people, they wanted to give this a rebirth of these ideas. And this idea of a rebirth gives rise to the name of this period of history. So the French word for birth is naître, or naissance. So you might think the English word nativity play, so that is a play about the birth of Jesus, or if you're native to a country, that means you were born in a certain country. So you can see the link between the French word naître and nativity and native. So naissance is birth, so a renaissance, so re is to do something again, so a renaissance is a rebirth in Europe of these ideas that have been lost from the times of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Okay, so this is why this period is called the Renaissance, this rebirth into intellectual ideas. And it's easiest to illustrate this change in ideas and this change in how people saw the world by looking first of all at what artists were doing in Italy during the Renaissance. So here is a picture of Mary and Jesus, Madonna and Child, painted before the Renaissance. So this is a painting from the Middle Ages, and there's such amazing, beautiful works of art from the Middle Ages, but they're very decorative. So the idea is that there's no real point trying to paint what the world is like around you, because it is dirty and horrible and full of sin, and why would you want to do that? So artists would usually try to make churches beautiful, make them look like heaven on earth, or they would try to make books look beautiful, because the books were usually the Bible and it was the Word of God, which is a glorious, wonderful thing. So this was supposed to be a decorative picture, just showing the reader that you've got Mary and Jesus there, who are holy because they've got halos, surrounded by angels, maybe sitting on something. That might be a chair, but it doesn't matter, we just can tell they're sitting down. So it's sending very clear messages to us, isn't it, that we've got Mary and Jesus are very religious, that there's lots of other religious people with wings around them who are probably angels, and they're sitting on like a throne ruling over people. And so it's quite a flat image. I always like to look at these pictures of people with these halos, these radiant discs of gold to show they're holy. If this was a real life picture, that they just turn around and like hit their head on this gold plate behind them. But anyway, that's how I see these pictures. So this is a typical picture from the Middle Ages. But then the Renaissance happened. At the end of the 1400s, early 1500s in Italy, and people had to look and say, well, actually, let's actually look at what people actually look like, and let's actually look deeply to see if we can try and recreate as realistically as possible not only what people look like, but the world around them. So we have this other picture which is painted during the Renaissance by an artist you may have heard of called Leonardo da Vinci. And this is the same subject. This is the Madonna and Child, so Mary and Jesus, and it's amazing, like just how lifelike these images are, isn't it? That they're almost coming out of the canvas, coming out of the painting towards you. And also you can see that how the artist has really carefully looked at how somebody sits down to make it look like Mary's actually sitting down, but she's actually sitting down on a rock, and so that's all been very carefully observed, and the form of the baby and the form of Mary has all been carefully studied, and you probably use live models to study and carefully measure exactly what it's like, which is why it looks so realistic. If you think about the background as well, if you compare it to the previous picture, where there's no depth here at all, it's just a flat image. Here, there's a whole world going out behind. And so this is another really important technique in art that was developed during the Renaissance, this idea of perspective. So the idea of how do you make pictures look deep, and how do you make things look as if they're going away into the background. See, so there's lots of examples of Renaissance art, but you can see this is a clear illustration of how people have gone from just wanting things to look beautiful and thinking, I just want to, this is just how the world is, this is how things are, this is how the pictures have always been, to challenging that and really studying the world and making art look lifelike and realistic. Okay, so that's in art. Now, Leonardo da Vinci, lots of people say he's an artist, but just like many people during this time in Italy, their heads were full of ideas. They were thinking, this is such an exciting time. Let's study people who create great paintings. But Leonardo da Vinci also wanted to create great machines as well, and he came up with lots of amazing ideas. For example, some people think he thought of the idea of the first helicopter, for example. But he's also fascinated about how the human body works. Now, in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church, which controlled everything, everyone's beliefs, said you can't cut bodies open. God wouldn't want that. So nobody cut bodies open. and the only real medical training anybody had was to read a book by a chap called Galen, who was a Roman doctor. So, and that had been approved by the church, of course. So nobody really knew about how the body worked. But people like Leonardo da Vinci began to question this. And Leonardo da Vinci actually used to pay people to go and rob graves for him so that he could dissect their bodies in his studio and produce fantastic illustrations of it. So here we have an illustration by Leonardo da Vinci again of him dissecting a dead pregnant woman's womb. And we have some very careful anatomical drawings of the fetus here. So this is just one of many examples of people actually looking really carefully at the world around them and trying to work out how it actually worked. Not just the explanation is that's what God would want it to be like. Another example of this was a chap called Vesalius. Now Vesalius, he produced a beautifully illustrated book which was published using a printing press, and more about that in the second video of these series. But he carefully dissected human corpses and had an illustrator draw very carefully what he was doing and what he was finding. And so he created this huge book which had very detailed illustrations of a fully cut up human body with, there's illustrations of the brain and the feet and the hands and the skin being peeled back, and this illustration here shows the blood vessels around the body and the lungs. You can see the detail of the illustrations, and this was amazing for people at the time. They'd never knew what was inside the human body. They'd never seen what was inside the human body unless they'd seen it guts pour out during a battlefield. So this was quite a revolutionary book which really changed the way that people saw what humans were. No longer did people just accept blindly that they were creatures created by God who were more intelligent than animals. Suddenly we could see that we were made of flesh and bone and things, and that actually maybe we were no better than animals, which fed into a whole new way of thinking. So really revolutionary literature was happening at the time. And there were huge advances in science, in other areas of science as well. Most famously, Galileo Galilei, who you may have heard of, was a astrologer. We might call him an astronomer nowadays. So he studied the stars with his telescope, as many people did, because they believed that the stars could influence what happened on Earth, as we saw when we looked at the Black Death. But what Galileo did by his study of the stars was he thought, well, hang on a second. I know that most people in the Middle Ages, they just believed that the Earth is at the centre of the universe, just like this illustration on the left-hand side shows. That the moon goes around the Earth. All the planets go around the Earth, the sun goes around the Earth, because of course God created the Earth, so therefore the Earth must be the centre of the universe. And that was just accepted truth, no questions asked. But Galileo, he got out his telescope, he studied the stars, and he mapped mathematically the movement of the planet and the movement of the stars, the movement of the sun, and he did his mathematical calculations, and he said, well, hang on a second, no, this isn't true. It's not the Earth that's at the centre of the universe. It's the sun that's at the centre of the universe, and the Earth is just one of several planets which goes round it. This was incredibly shocking at the time. The Pope, the Church were in uproar. He was arrested because clearly, it went against the word of God. How dare you suggest that the Earth's not at the centre of the universe? And so poor Galileo, he was basically tortured and told that he would be killed unless he wrote another book saying that he was wrong, which is what he actually did. But we still remember him for the person that challenged this idea that the Earth was the centre of the universe. Now there are lots of other areas of science and areas of art, sculpture, people you might have heard of like Michelangelo, Copernicus, amazing scientists and artists were all having these incredible ideas during this period called the Renaissance. This intellectual activity was mainly happening in Italy, but other areas of southern Europe as well. But it led to an exploding of these ideas, not only in Italy and southern Europe, but also across the rest of Europe, as we'll come to see in the next video.